So thank you everybody for being here today with us and with this new meeting on the Financial Line seminars. It's my great pleasure to introduce Donald MacKenzie from the University of Edinburgh. And so it's a pleasure to have Donald here, and I'm a great fan of Donald. And today, Donald will talk about apps and also prediction. And so the title of his talk is The Material Political Economy of Apps, Optimization, Advertising, and its Disruption. And so thank you very much, Donald, for accepting our invitation. And of course, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emiliano. And as I said to you in person before we started, thanks very much for having me back a second time. It's very good indeed of you. I'm assuming everyone can see the slides okay, that's screen sharing is working fine. Good. So the first slide, this is a team project, and the first slide has the photographs of the other team members. I'm not hinting that they spend too much time on their phones, but you'll immediately see as I get into the talk why I am using them with pictures of phones. And I'm going to do 5 things in the talk. No point in reading through a long list, but I'll just mention that I have actually narrowed my focus down a bit from the title of the talk that I gave to Emiliano in December or whenever we were deciding it. It was optimization. Prediction in this space is part of optimization, and that, to my mind, actually the most interesting part of optimization. So I'm going to focus directly on prediction. You might be just a teensy bit surprised by the image I've got on the slide, the mobile phone game Candy Crush. I would take a reasonable bet that in an intellectual audience such as this, that not a single person has ever played Candy Crush. But do shout out if you are. If you're on level 15,000 of, and there are more than 15,000 levels of Candy Crush. If you're a level 15,000, oh look, maybe somebody's gone into the chat to say that, but they do have played Candy Crush. The framing I'm using, and I'm going to be extremely brief here, and we can come back to it if anyone wants to, is the framing I'm using is material political economy. And when I teach about this stuff, I always use the wonderful study by Mark Bloch of the conflict in the Middle Ages between the milling of grain on watermills or windmills controlled by feudal seigneur, and on hand mills which the peasants preferred to do, because if you did it on the Lord's mill, then you had to hand over something between 1 sack and 14 or 1 sack and 22 as a fee to use the mill. And feudal superiors, if they could, smashed the hand mills of the peasants, so they couldn't mill in private. So it is an economic conflict with a very strong material dimension. It's about material practices, the arrangement of the material world, and it's political in at least a broad sense of political, so hence material political economy. And that, to my mind, applies just as well to the digital world. No news that the digital economy is material. I'm going to be talking about online ads, and of course you will, I'm sure, all know that in most cases the ads that you are shown online are the result of auctions, and auctions aren't simply abstract economic operations. They, for example, contribute quite palpably to the rather large carbon emissions associated with digital advertising. And as with the milling of grain, it's a material, political economy that, materiality. And I mean, I'm with philosophers in the audience. I want to be very clear. I'm not being ontological in this talk. I'm not trying to draw any kind of ontological boundary. Material political economy, to my mind, is simply a heuristic, a reminder to focus on where, when, and how things happen, which is, in at least some cases, in a broad sense, political. And then finally, I'll say, of course, if we're talking politics, you also have to talk about power. And there's at least two aspects of power I will be touching on in the talk. This is the data that I'm drawing on. I would put all the sort of methodological stuff into the background, but I'm more than welcome to come back to it. The only bits of the data that are going to directly appear are a small number of quotes from interviewees and a little snippet from an online training course I took. It was actually extremely useful, and I'll touch on it, as I said. If I interpret the Q&A correctly, I'm not going to take the time to go into the chat. Only one person in the audience has played Candy Crush. It's what's called a match 3 game. What you got to do is to get three or more identical digital objects representing candy, representing sweets, into a line. And if you look at this screenshot here, you can immediately see several different ways of getting the three identical sweets into a line. It's an astonishingly mass scale cultural phenomenon. It's been downloaded more than 5 billion times now. Of course, any one person might have downloaded it more than once, maybe 10 times, maybe more, but that must mean that of at least several 100 million people have played Candy Crush. And just compare that to just about any other form of culture that there is. It's free to play. You can download it and play it absolutely without charge. But it makes a lot of money for its owners. It was originally a relatively small game studio called King. Now Candy Crush is owned by Microsoft. And you make money with a game of this sort, and most mobile phone games are free to play, but most of them, or at least many of them, do have a way of monetizing. Here's Candy Crush's way of monetizing for small sums of money. Cheapest deal that's on screen there is 99 pence, so just a tiny bit over €1. But hey, €1 multiplied by hundreds of millions of people, that's worth having. Not everybody does it. In fact, only a small minority of users actually pay. And that's getting a bit towards the problem of prediction, because you have multiple opportunities to advertise a game such as Candy Crush. But you don't want necessarily just to spread your adverts at random, sort of over cyberspace as a whole. You want to show your ad if there's reason for your system to think that the user to whom the ad is about to be shown is first of all likely to install the game, because if they don't install the game, then nothing happens. And more than that, much more than that, more importantly than that, you want to show the ad to someone who is then likely to spend, who's going to be in the 3 to 5% that do spend. And even more specifically than that, you want to advertise to potential whales, which is a term used in this space. It's someone who spends relatively large amounts of money. In the case of a match 3 game such as Candy Crush, that relatively large amounts of money might be $25 a month or thereabouts. I just happened, I've been attending lots of online events in the digital advertising space, and I got a nice little figure last night for what proportion of users of a game such as Candy Crush are whales, and the figure was something like 0.25% will be whales. So out of 1,000 people, maybe 2 or 3 whales. So that's what the job of prediction is. Is this kind of person going to install? If they install, will they spend? Are they in that tiny minority? Are they potentially in that tiny minority of whales? The traditional solution in the digital advertising space to this problem of prediction, and then you can see it is also a problem of optimization, which is why I use that term in the original title, is individualized. And because I'm sure in a seminar on the philosophy of finance, people will know Elena Esposito's work on trading and performativity and the like. I'm quoting here from her most recent book, and it actually it's a very nice statement of the individualized solution that I'm going to begin by talking about. Digital techniques abandon the statistical idea of averaging, process individual elements of the population. Now, to have an individualized solution, you need to solve the material problem that people in digital advertising refer to as identity resolution. That's to say, there's 2 or more digital traces. Are those traces actions by the same individual? When we're dealing with mobile phones, and the talk is exclusively about mobile phones, because mobile phones are of course very personalized devices, the identity resolution problem becomes a phone identification problem. The key question is it the same phone? Because if it is the same phone, then you can link digital traces of the kind that I put on the slide. The phone on which an ad was shown, the history of app events such as purchases on that phone, and then also, of course, you need to know that the phone that installs the game, the app and game, and on which future app events take place, that's all the same phone. So this is what you need to join up for the individualized solution to the problem of prediction that I'm dealing with. Now, I'm sure everybody who's taken part, because late afternoon, everybody who's taken part in this seminar has probably accepted cookies at least a dozen times today. So you might say, well, why can't this be done by cookies? The reason is quite straightforward. The cookies are a web technology, and they're simply not available in mobile phone apps. But for many years, mobile phone apps had something better than cookies from the viewpoint of identity resolution, which is Apple's IDFA, or identifier for advertisers. If you have an Android phone, it's got a very similar identifier known as a GAID, Google Advertising ID. It's a 32-digit number that's unique to your specific phone. Now you can change it. You can actually zero it out. In other words, turn the 32 hexadecimal digits into 32 hexadecimal zeros. But this is only the second time I've really talked about this. Last time, one person in the audience had actually done this. Again, if anybody in the audience has either changed or zeroed out their app IDFA or their GAID, do again. Just shout out. Hardly anybody does. So in practice, this is a kind of permanent identifier of your phone. Of course, it sits on your phone and it has to be collected. And there are two main ways of doing it. What in the field are called the walled gardens. Google and Meta, above all, have software development kits in basically any commercially relevant app. And that app reports, installs to the SDK, and the SDK captures the IDFA or GAID, and then sends the information back to mothership in either Google's or Meta's systems. Those are the big players. There are also smaller platforms called mobile measurement platforms that work rather differently, that have to be sort of materially inserted in the process, above all in the process of someone tapping on an ad and installing, and then going on to install an app. As far as I can tell, TikTok and Snap are still largely in that world. They haven't yet moved into the full walled garden world. If you collect enough IDFAs, enough GAIDs, and enough events streams and installs of apps linked by those IDFAs and GAIDs, you are in Esposito's world. That quote that I put up, the individualized solution to the problem of prediction, is available. In the words of one of my interviewees, DD, I'm anonymizing him, what you get is effective deterministic targeting. Now, even I, as a non-philosopher, when I heard the word determinism, I thought, wow, that's a sort of heavy sort of word to be using. And it's clear it's actually not been used in this space in a sense of determinism that a philosopher would recognize. It simply means very high probability. To give you a sense of concretely what that is, there's a host of match-3 games. Candy Crush is simply the best known of them. There are probably hundreds of match-3 games out there. I mean, most of them, of course, completely unsuccessful, a few successful ones. If you're a match 3 whale, in other words, if you spend reasonably heavily in one of those games, then it's overwhelmingly likely that if an ad persuades you to shift to a different match 3 game, you will continue to spend roughly equivalent amounts of money. So if you're reasonably confident that the opportunity to show the ad is the opportunity to someone whose history of app events suggests that they're a match 3 whale, that's what in effect effective deterministic targeting means in this context. But don't read it as, don't read it with the philosophical baggage that comes with the word determinism. I took the course Modern Mobile Marketing at Scale to prepare myself for this aspect of the research, and it cost $700 paid by Edinburgh University for me to do so, and it was actually worth it for just one image from the course, which is the image of the iceberg that very nicely captures the aspect of platform power that I'm calling cognitive asymmetry. And here it's the asymmetry between the platform and the advertiser, the firm or individual who is advertising their goods or services or games or whatever on Facebook. Above the surface of the ocean are the data that's accessible to that user to be used to target their advertising. Beneath the surface, much bigger in relative terms, is everything else, such as all the data, the app events and the installs tied together by IDFAs, by the platform's systems. The advertiser has no direct access to this. The platform keeps this to itself and allows only the above the ocean surface data aspects to be used for targeting. And between roughly 2015 and roughly 2020, this changed the nature of much of digital advertising. This is the quotation I particularly like from the course that I took. It was slightly out of date. It was actually the lectures were recorded in 2020, which actually accidentally turns out to be a benefit because that's a useful historical marker. You can also see, if you're talking computer games, of course, you're talking about a gendered space. Core game, therefore trying to reach men. Candy Crush is not a core game. That's not what it would be referred to in this space as a casual game, not a core game. But it's not that I want to focus on. It's the shift exemplified by the quote, and the course teacher Eric Seufert is allowing me to name him, so I can say this is Eric Seufert talking, between a traditional way of thinking about advertising, where the human advertising practitioner decided who they wanted to target and used the platform as a way to reach those people, versus the situation by 2020 when none of what you used to do matters, Seufert told his students. It doesn't exist. All you have to do is to feed that machine. Now, I don't expect anybody here has got any serious interest in mobile phone games, but this is only superficially about mobile phone games. It's actually about all forms of direct response advertising. Now that's advertising where the goal is to get the target to do something in the near future, to buy something, to install a game, to sign up for a Donald Trump rally, for example. And the dichotomy, the contrast that's drawn is between direct response and brand building advertising. There's a very nice article in The Atlantic 4 years ago on the Trump campaign's use of Facebook, which in effect, they don't phrase it like this, but this is in effect what they mean. The Trump campaign was not trying to build this guy's brand. That wasn't the kind of advertising they were doing. They were trying to get the audience to do something. And that meant that they were in the world that Sufert just described on the slide that I've just shown you. They were simply using the standard machine learning affordances of the Facebook platform. That's why Facebook is worth billions or trillions of dollars. Its capacity to do direct response advertising of this kind. And again, this is the same interviewee, DD, that I'm quoting. Now, he's talking, of course, specifically about match 3 games and finding, monetizing users of them. But, and of course, you know, they're more important to Facebook than you might think. But certainly it's not just that that's made Facebook $1 trillion company. It's direct response advertising and its optimization. Now, those of you who know Zuboff's Age of Surveillance Capitalism might start to be thinking, well, Donald's presenting a rather Zuboff-inflected view of all of this, but actually I'm not. Because platforms, even the biggest platforms, such as Facebook, aren't all-powerful. And here's where the materiality of the mobile phone enters the story. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snap, YouTube, you name it, exist in everyday life primarily in the form of mobile phone apps. And to be an app is to be built on top of something. In the case of Apple phones, on top of Apple's operating system, iOS, and in terms of non-Apple phones, well, there are a few exceptions in Chinese phones, but in most of the world's phones that are not Apple's are Android phones, and thus built on top of that operating system. And this is where the disruption comes in to the story, and where de-individualization and the weakening of prediction come in. Because if you're built on top of something, you depend upon it. To be an app is potentially to be exposed to a version of what Michael Mann in 1984 christened infrastructural power. In the case of Apple phones, and I apologize to the people who have Android phones, all this is going to happen to you. It just hasn't quite happened yet. It may not happen until 2025. But if you're an app on an Apple phone, you're built on Apple's infrastructure in two senses. First of all, iOS is what runs that phone, and as an app, you have no direct influence whatsoever on iOS. And if you're an app, and this is about to change in the European Union as a result of the Digital Markets Act, but up until now, the only way you can get onto the user's iPhone is via the Apple App Store. Exclusion from the App Store has up till now been effectively a death sentence for an app. Okay, now it's a protracted death because, of course, existing apps keep running. It just they can't be updated, and no new users can be acquired. What I'm talking about, and I'll talk about it materially in more detail in a moment, is Apple's April 2021 App Tracking Transparency initiative. I would really love it if I had a nice inside story about politics within Apple to tell you as to why this big move, and it, as you'll see, it really was a big move, why this big move was made. I mean, I have interviews outside of Apple who speculate, as DD, and again, as DD does here. But I really do not know. My instinct is that most of the speculations by interviewees are reasonably hostile to Apple in the interpretations. I think they may just be a little bit one-sided. I suspect that commitment to privacy within Apple is actually reasonably strong, possibly in part for commercial reasons, that privacy is a selling point of the iPhone. Facebook really didn't like it. The policy was implemented in 2021, but was actually announced the previous year. By December of 2020, Facebook was taking out full-page ads, like paper ads. This Facebook taking out newspaper ads, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and the like, denouncing the coming move by Apple. But the story is an object lesson in the importance of infrastructural power, because Facebook protested vehemently, but then complied. We have no choice. If we don't, they'll block us from the App Store, which would, for Facebook, have been an economically Meta. But at this point, I think they were still called Facebook. It would have been economically catastrophic not to have complied with Apple's initiative. If you have an iPhone, you will have seen the kind of screen, the kind of screen on your screen. You have seen the prompt of the kind that I've got in the screenshot. If you're an app that wants to track people outside of its own electronic confines, you have to show that prompt screen, and you're not allowed to withdraw any functionality from those users who ask the app not to be tracked. And only roughly a fifth of people, so my interviewees tell me, allow tracking. The vast majority tap on Ask App Not to Track. And if you tap on that, you assign the value denied to the variable within iOS written in Swift called authorization status. And if authorization status is denied and the app asks the iPhone for its IDFA, they get back the app gets back 32 zeros. So the linking can no longer be made by IDFA. And that was what's so disruptive about the move that Apple made in 2021. Facebook was actually quite badly hit by this. Now, the fall in stock price I've got on the slide, $352 to $93, had causes other than this, but this was part of why Facebook was in some trouble in 2021, 2022. A very nice statement in the third quarter 2021 earnings call by its chief financial officer, talking about all the retooling that was necessary, but also I highlighted to basically work for aggregated events. So not individualized events, but aggregated events. That was difficult, just as difficult. And it worked its way through to weakened predictive capacity. Now, how, as an outside researcher, you operationalize the weakening of predictive capacity, that's a sort of difficult thing to do. But the way I'm thinking about it is that's one of the things that makes the free-to-play mobile phone game sector the reason I'm focusing on it. Because if prediction is weaker, it's harder to identify which potential user will spend, and it's very hard to identify which potential user is going to be a whale. And if it's harder, it's going to be more expensive because you're going to have to show more ads to get the high value users that you want. So in the words of interviewee DE, it increases the obstacle to launching a game, and DF made that more concrete. It's cost anywhere from 2 to 3 times as much to launch a new mobile phone game. And once again, I need to say that the bad times that the computer gaming sector is having at the moment are not due only to this, but this is a part of the picture. Unsurprisingly, given how disruptive and problematic this was for the rest of the sector, it's not been accepted lying down. And what's going on in much of the digital economy, or certainly the aspects of the digital economy that depend on apps and specifically depend on Apple phones, is a kind of latent, subterranean, material conflict, which curiously doesn't seem to be reported very much, but it really is a very substantial and important tension, implicitly at least, potentially at least, in the digital economy, between two ways of organizing the material world. Apple's preferred way, store, kit, ad, network, or scan. What's distinctive about it is that crucial data is stored in your phone and is kept there for a period of at least 24 hours, plus a random time that can be a further 24 hours. And the reason for randomization is to stop people just doing a time shift, so to be being able to tie things together by exact timings. And indeed, it can be longer than 24 plus 24. It can be longer than 48 hours if the advertiser wants to gather data on at least a few app events. And once the time period is passed, the data is not sent directly from your phone to the ad network who's running the ad on behalf of the advertiser, but via an Apple server that creates, and I'm a sociologist at heart, so I love this, it warms my sociologist heart. The Apple server checks for crowd anonymity. In other words, checks that there isn't something distinctive, like a very big purchase, for example, that makes the phone stand out from a sufficiently large bunch of other phones. If people know the technical literature on privacy, this is what's known more technically as K anonymity, with K roughly 50. K equals roughly 50, I think, in how Apple is implementing it. Not great from the viewpoint of the rest of the sector, much of which seems to be trying as best it can to continue measurement, optimization, prediction, using whatever data is available to them. Now, a fifth of users do consent to tracking. It's not quite, it's actually worse than that, and I can explain that in the Q&A if people want, but there are some. And of course, you can feed that into your machine learning system. There's other things you can feed into your machine learning system. And what you really want is, first of all, materially to get this from outside of Apple's systems. You don't want anything running through Apple's systems, and you want to be getting it in real time. You don't want it to be delayed by 24, 48, 72, possibly in the worst case 96 hours, as it would be in the case of Apple. And this does come back to my my original theme of optimization, because you want to optimize your advertising in real time. That's part of the power of direct response advertising. If there's going to be a flashpoint, it's going to be about the capture of IP, of Internet Protocol addresses, because you can do that outside of Apple's systems, and you can do it in real time. It's not as good. It's because it's not a full de-individualizer. Because after all, if you're using your mobile phone out in the streets of Rome, then your phone's IP address is going to be the local network IP address of your mobile data provider, and even in your apartment, the IP address, unless you're living on your own, the IP address is going to be shared with other people's devices. So it's not a full individualizer, but as my interviewee here says, it's a lot better than nothing from the viewpoint of prediction. That whole part of the digital economy is kind of pivoting on the interpretation of 5 words in the Q&A for app developers of Apple's App Store. If you look at the full quote, you can see a reference to the user's network connection, and that would be a natural interpretation of, on a natural interpretation, the IP address would count as part of the user's network connection. What you're not allowed to do is to collect that data for the purpose of uniquely identifying the user's phone. And the penalty, as you can see at the very end, is the death penalty, rejection, expulsion from the App Store. The people who are using IP addresses, I'm told, rely on the fact that an IP address, as I just said, does not uniquely identify a phone in the way that an IDFA used to, and furthermore that their purpose is not the unique identification of the phone. it's gathering data to feed into their machine learning predictive systems. Now, people don't think that Apple is at all happy with that, but Apple has not yet done anything to stop it. People have not been expelled from the App Store for doing this. I asked interviewee DE why Apple was content with a rule that had very evident interpretive flexibility about it. This is his response. My own hypothesis here is, but again, can't test this out because I'm not getting the right access to Apple. I suspect it's probably more a material kind of thing, that an IDFA is materially controllable by Apple because of Apple's control over the operating system iOS, whereas an IP address is not controllable in the same way. So Apple probably simply doesn't want to have a rule that they can't enforce by material means, rather than simply saying, hey, you must not do it, and if you do, we'll punish you. So finally, my coda, what this means for the everyday advertising practitioner. Because of course, what this all involves, either using Apple's material system or using the alternatives to it that exist, or indeed on the web. This is not, what I'm about to say now is not specific to mobile phone apps any longer. Greater reliance on machine learning about cohorts. We've often thought, and this is part of the Zuboff picture of surveillance capitalism, we've often thought that digital advertising is about the capacity by the advertiser, the human practitioner in this case, to micro-target. But the platforms are now telling you not to do that. They're discouraging it. Indeed, in some cases, making it infeasible. And this de-agencing of the human practitioner, so to speak, has come in two stages. The first is the one that I already had on the slide. None of that stuff you used to do matters. Now just feed that machine. But that is 2020. Since 2020, this is not a quote exactly from 2021. I don't know exactly when it is. This is if you're running Meta's Advantage Plus machine learning optimized app install campaigns, the kind of thing you'd want to run if you're trying to get users for your mobile phone game. You can't add additional targeting option. You can't target your audience based on gender. So notice the verb. It's not that you shouldn't do that, or even that you mustn't do that, but you can't do that. Materially, you cannot do it. The traditional advertising practitioner holds close to their heart their knowledge of the best targets for the advertising of the particular product or service that the client is employing them to try to sell. They're, in many cases, a sort of lay sociologist, so to speak. Even Bourdieu distinction is possibly somewhere, maybe not explicitly in their brain, but implicitly in their brain. That's now discouraged, and in important contexts made materially impossible. So that's why I use quite the strong notion of de-agencing there. So finally, and this is literally the last word, the last slide. Don't think this is just about Apple phones, because by late 2024, or probably more realistically 2025, this will be coming to the Android phone. If you have an Android phone, it's already there in the web, in the equivalents, roughly equivalent measures already in place in Safari and Firefox. It'll come to Chrome, and this is a timescale I think Google will meet. It'll come to Chrome in the final quarter of 2024. So this is a change that's affecting digital advertising as a whole, not simply advertising on mobile phones. And those in very small print, so I'm afraid you probably can't see them, are the sources that I've been using. And I will now stop screen sharing. Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donald, for this wonderful talk, and there's plenty of insights and also, I mean, open issues. And so we can now open the debate. And so I guess there are questions from the audience, and so maybe we can the people willing to make questions.
Francesco seems to have his hand up.
Maybe it was an applause.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
So
thanks a lot, Donald. It's fascinating as always when you start opening the black box using the tools that you have crafted for the past years.
Quite a few years, I'm afraid, Mark. Yes.
No, but it's. I was wondering whether your interviewees or yourself have had a chance to look into the details of the last piece of European regulation, the DMA that you mentioned, Digital Markets Act.
Yeah.
And specifically how, because I mean, I don't know a lot about European market regulations, apart from one that I studied extensively some time ago.
Yeah.
And you know that I'm obsessed with questions of compliance, interpretation of the legal texts and things like that. And so I'm always a bit skeptical about the power of a regulation, especially when it touches upon the organization of the, let's say, of the payment or the fee infrastructure, or, you know, trying, I mean, how the European regulators try to monitor things to make it fairer and more transparent, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I was wondering whether this change that you described very clearly, and the new world that seems, more advantageous for the user or not, I don't know. Well, yeah, your interviewees, do they have any fears about this text? Do they think it will reshuffle the problem in a new way? You see what I mean?
Yeah. No, I do absolutely see what you mean. I don't have a very good answer to you. I mean, this is joint research, and the person in the team who has been focusing on European Union regulation is Charlotte Rommerskirchen. And she knows the regulation very much better than I do. If there's any regulator in the world that has the capacity to influence this system and is likely to use that capacity, it is indeed the European Union. And the Digital Markets Act is for certain, you know, a very important tool in the hands of European regulators. But your skepticism as well is entirely well founded, because of course you can comply with regulation in various modes, and say with the General Data Protection regulation, the GDPR. I mean, compliance is largely taken the form of the capture of consent strings, as they're called. I mean, so this, that's the practical nuisance of the cookie banners. You always have to click before you get anywhere. What Apple has done in response, this is the first really important use of the Digital Markets Act. What Apple has done in response, as I'm sure you know, is to announce that within the European Union, it is going to allow sideloading of apps onto the iPhone. In other words, the user doesn't have to use the App Store, that can go to the website of whichever the app provider it is and download via that website. And if that catches on, if users start doing that on any large scale, then Apple's infrastructural power is actually weakened by it. The people who are going to be most immediately pleased is the game studio Epic Games, that has fought a long-standing, bitter legal battle with Apple for the right to do that. But the trouble is, of course, user behavior is sticky in this kind of digital context. At the very least, games developers and the like are almost certainly going to have to offer users incentives to sideload rather than use the convenience of the App Store. And unfortunately, because of Brexit, I am no longer a citizen of the European Union. I can't test this out for myself, but people do tell me that Apple, because the side loading has to be done via iOS, via the operating system. People do tell me that the Apple has designed a rather clunky and time-consuming side loading process, so that the combination of stickiness and the fact that this may not be the easiest thing to do, and perhaps you might fear that you're inadvertently going to download malware onto your iPhone, that this may defuse the threat. But unquestionably, the Digital Markets Act is an important part of the picture.
Thanks a lot.
So thank you, Mark, and thank you, Donald. I don't know if there are other questions. Of course, I have questions.
Yeah.
So I don't see people from the audience willing to do questions. So maybe I can make my question.
Yes, do please, Emiliano.
So it was very fascinating listening to you, and also the connection between the apps, their individualization and prediction. And so I was trying to think of the opposite scenario. Maybe it's a theoretical question. I don't know if it's right on the point of your talk, but I was thinking of what if instead of individualizing data, we allow to a total complete individualization of data, in the sense that everybody can know everything about everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. So at that point, I know it, and so yeah. I know that my data can be seen by everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I can an object of prediction.
Yeah, yeah.
So in what would the behavior of the on the developer be? And in that sense, I see an analogy with financial systems, in the sense that also financial system has a kind of infrastructural power,
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that you cannot access the identifiers of the bank account,
mm-hmm.
or the people who do the transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can reconstruct the behavior of the stock market, for instance, only in the aggregated,
mm-hmm.
and so you have the aggregated data, but not data. And so in that sense, there is an analogy. What the behavior of financial systems, stock markets will be if I can know instantaneously what everybody is doing. And so I have to my behavior because I can be traced and predicted. And so I don't know if it's right on the point.
No, it's very interesting questions. I've got two quite different responses to them. I mean, the first is that I've actually asked myself, why am I less bothered by cookies and the like, and by tracking online than many people in the wider world are? And what I think I realize it is that if you are an academic, as I imagine most of I don't know everybody who's taking part, most of us are, that a large part of our digital lives are led non-anonymously anyway. Like, I'm pretty confident that all of our professional email addresses are in the public domain. So when Apple when Apple offers me the chance to obscure my email address when I'm signing on for something, I think, well, not much point really, and I'm sure, like me, you'll probably all get all sorts of spam as a result of having your email address in the public domain. So we do have some individual professional insight into what it is like to exist electronically with, we all, of course, have private stuff. We all got medical records and family stuff and so on, with some insight in that. I mean, I actually think in terms of finance that there is an infrastructure that is pretty substantially de-individualizing. The big part of it is pretty substantially individualizing via the credit reference agencies. My pension scheme, the British University Superannuation Scheme, was careless with its computer security, and there's a massive hack of British academics data that USS, the pension scheme, holds, and the only thing they could do in response to that is offer us each individually a membership of Experian, the credit rating, the credit reference agency, and when I look at Experian's record on me, there is a lot of data there. There's my addresses, for the physical addresses for the past 25 years. There's a full list of my credit cards, in whether those are in good standing or not. Now, they're not the numbers of the credit cards, but there's a lot of individualized data in the infrastructure of consumer finance, and of course that infrastructure really wouldn't work at all well. And indeed, it's quite interesting that the Apple credit reference agencies such as Experian are not covered by Apple's measures, so they're not restricted. I assume because of this infrastructural role that they play in the consumer aspects of finance.
Okay, thank you, Donald. And so maybe a quick follow-up. Maybe if I could choose what data to show or share, could be another solution, in the sense that the user, and also it could be paid for sharing or showing some data, and maybe.
Yeah. No, again, two very good points. And indeed, yes, the idea of paying people for sharing their data has been mooted. The trouble is the price is very low, that big data is, of course, very valuable in the aggregate, but any individual bit of it, you know, the monetary, to the extent you can assign a monetary value to it, you know, you might be talking about $10, 10 euros, something of that sort, but not, of course, instantly. You know, in little bits and so on. What's, you know, in the talk I rather rammed together what Apple has done and what Google is about to do with its privacy sandbox, and that to a degree does actually do what you suggested. That's to say, it does give the user quite substantial control over what data about them is shared. I mean, part of the privacy sandbox is a thing called topics, which is partly, so I beg your pardon, for some reason Zoom, whenever I make a certain hand movement, Zoom sends I look like I'm congratulating myself with so an important part of the privacy sandbox is a thing called topics, which is the stuff that you are kind of commercially interested in, and you can opt out of it, or you can edit the browser. It's the Chrome browser. The browser assigns those topics on the basis of your browsing history. But if you happen not to like what it assigns, you can just withdraw a topic. But I think the thing is, it's going to be a bit like the changing the IDFA, that only a small minority of people are going to opt out or intervene to change the topics. And indeed, I mean, there's an ironic effect actually in this, which I was told about in relation to Android phones, where at the moment there's no equivalent of Apple's measures, but people can zero out their Google advertising ID. But the irony is, if they do that, then they get lots of ads for high value products served to them, because advertiser systems make the inference that if you've zeroed out your Google advertising ID, you are technically savvy, and therefore you're likely to be in a favorable socio-economic situation. Therefore, you will have money to spend on whatever product. I mean, with all these things, there's the issue about giving the user a capacity, but also the issue of, will the user be motivated to put the time and effort in to use the capacity?
Thank you very much. I don't know if there are other questions from the audience. So I also see Donald Gillis. Okay, I see. Hi, Donald.
Hello, Donald.
You're
on mute, I think, Donald.
No, you're still muted. No, maybe it doesn't. I don't know, but we see you, but we don't listen to you. So you're still muted. I mean, Donald Gillis.
No, I was just saying that I missed the talk for a really stupid reason.
Yeah.
I tuned in at 5 o'clock London time. So it said clearly.
Yes, I saw you arrive at exactly that point, and I thought, aha, yes.
Me too.
So it was really stupid, but I was glad to pick up at least a little of the discussion anyway.
Good, good.
So I saw Mark willing to make a question.
Yeah, it was just a follow-up of what you just said, Donald. So I understand it's at the beginning of a project somehow. I mean, even though you already have spent some time, but so how far away do you think it's maybe possible to kind of nuance Zubov's proposal, and surveillance theories that are all about, I'm thinking also about a book that you might have read about drones in the military and, the creating of micro-targeting boxes to kill people and things like that. What you show actually is that it would be more easy if the micro-targeting story could continue somehow to develop, a theory on surveillance and the power of. So I don't know. What's your take at the moment? Do you think you have enough to show? Let's say a more nuanced to develop a more nuanced theory of surveillance in the digital era.
Yeah. No, I mean, in a sense, I would hope so. I mean that, my criticism of Zubov, and I'll leave some smaller academic points out of it. And my criticism of Zubov is actually really quite straightforward. That surveillance is a very strong word, and therefore I think it should be kept for situations of exactly the kind that you just alluded to. That is to say, if you're under surveillance, then a drone might kill you, or if you're under surveillance and you're in China or Russia, you might end up in jail. Those things are surveillance, and the apparatus of mobile phones and location tracking and the like are an important kind of component of that. But attempts to sell me things, attempts to gather information about me in order to sell me things or to get me to install games, those don't actually seem to me in themselves to merit the strong word surveillance. Now, sometimes the side effects of that apparatus would merit the term, the term surveillance, but I personally want to keep that word. It's a bit like the notion of fascism, that we shouldn't use fascist as a sort of all-purpose insult. And we should keep it for genuine fascists. In terms of, say, platform power, which would be a sort of more realistic thing to contribute to. Yes, I would hope for greater nuance, because the kind of developments that I've been reviewing, both Apple's and actually Google's, which are in this sense kind of similar, that as well as to some extent having a beneficial influence on the balance of power between the individual and the platform, they also have an influence on the distribution of power among platforms, so to speak. So the characteristic of both what Apple has done and what Google is about to do is that it bears on what's called third-party data, not first-party data, where first-party data are the data that the platform the platform collects from its users, and within the framework of the General Data Protection Regulation, for example, it is perfectly legitimate to collect it either on the basis of consent or perhaps business necessity. So first-party data is relatively unscathed by all of this. What this bears upon is third-party data, where the data has been collected not by the app or platform or whatever that the user is directly interacting with, but by some third party, or pertains to the behavior of the user outside of the electronic confines of the app or platform. And of course, what you do if you reduce the value of third-party data, you increase the relative value of first-party data. And that's, I think, a justified suspicion, particularly of Google, which of course has very, very rich third-party data. So, as in many cases in this area, there's often an implicit tension between the goal of privacy and data protection on the one hand, and the competition law antitrust goal on the other. And people are well aware of this, and they're trying to find productive solutions to it. But that issue, not just of the power of the platform vis-a-vis the user, but the power of the platform vis-a-vis the advertiser, which is what I was talking about in de-agencing, and the power of platform A vis-a-vis platforms B, C, D, and E. I think those need to be part of the picture. Like I say, I wouldn't conceptualize them around surveillance, because I think that's a misuse of the term. I would conceptualize that around platform power.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Donald. We have another questions coming from Sebastian Gizman. I hope the pronunciation is right. And thank you, Sebastian, for being here today with us.
Yes, and thank you for opening up this to like an interested audience. So I and Yarden are actually part of two research projects on the industry of personal data.
Oh yeah, wow.
We started the projects existed for longer. So mine is a media historical one, and Yardan's project is one on the contemporary situation that you've been describing, Donald.
Yeah.
And we share an in-between of social studies of finance, STS, media studies, and the like. Yeah. So at some point, in due time, we'll invite you over for.
Love to. Yeah, no, because
but that's just a
very happy.
Just a give you a preliminary idea of what we are interested in, because I just noticed that in the current turn to de-individualizing the targeting, there's a slight return to former modes of audience research. And that would be the sociological question at hand, but it's also like a media audience and history questions that I have. So the group, the cohort, I noticed this in the Google concepts that came up for all the sandboxing, and at the same time, I'm not believing into that on the full scale, because at some point, a lot of online advertising is still about convergence and actually getting people to buy stuff. So I wonder how that could play together with the other modes that revitalize modes of audience research that's catered to certain groups.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question, and I mean that's where the distinction between direct response advertising and brand building advertising comes in. There's a very nice paper by Thomas Beauvisage and other researchers in Paris, Sciences Po and Orange Laboratories on targeting, which I thought I disagreed with, but actually I realized that I don't disagree with it, that that we're simply picking up two different sides of the same picture, and there's even a little bit of their article. I confess I didn't notice it properly in the first reading that does this, which is to say that if you're doing brand building, then you are going to be very reluctant. This is practitioner in an advertising agency. You're going to be very reluctant to abandon the socio-demographic because you have your big client, you have your Procter and Gamble or your Unilever or your Nestle or Coca-Cola or whoever, and you need to be able to talk to your client about what you are doing. And the direct response mantra, the one I'm quoting Eric Seufert saying, don't bother with that, just feed the machine. If Nestle is paying your agency, sort of 50 million euros a year, and you say, "Oh, we're just feeding the machine," then that's not going to you're not going to keep that client for very long, and there's all sorts of ramifications because, of course, if you're Coca-Cola or Nestle or Procter and Gamble, you're selling, essentially consumer products. And if Coca-Cola flashes a advert for Coke in front of your eyes, they don't really expect you to tap on something and buy Coca-Cola online. They just hope that when you next go into a bar, you think, oh, I don't need a beer. I'll get a Coke. Yeah. And so the measurement issue is, of course, quite different in that kind of context, because linking up offline data with online ad exposure is a pretty tricky thing to do. So very old methodologies, as you indicate, are actually coming a bit back into fashion. So attribution, the measurement of the effectiveness of advertising, one of the main ways it used to be done, indeed it still is being done, is what's called media mix modeling, where the basic model is you're a big advertiser, you have your sales, and there's all sorts of complicated stuff like seasonality in your sales and so on, and your various media you got traditionally your TV ads, your billboards, and so on. And what media mix modeling does is it basically builds a great big regression model with sales as a dependent variable and everything else as the various independent variables. And you can perfectly well do media mix modeling in the world of Apple's and Google's privacy measures, because it's not dependent on insights into the individual, and it's coming back. It's always been there, but suddenly people in digital advertising used to look down on it as a sort of old-fashioned way of doing things, and they've had to change that opinion, because in some contexts now that's the best thing you can do.
So thank you very much, Sebastian and Donald. I don't see other questions coming from the audience. Maybe we could stop here. And
well, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for comments, questions. Sebastian, I look forward to being in touch. Mark, great to see you again. Hello again, Donald, and thank you, Emiliano, for being the perfect host.
Yeah, I'm the one who has to thank you, and thank you again, Donna, and also hi, Donna Gillis, and hope to see you soon. And I'm looking forward to reading your book on this subject.
Good, thank you. Okay, bye for now.
Thanks a lot. Bye.